So, just in the light of the 92nd Academy Awards from Los Angeles, this is kind of a follow-up to the previous video I made about actors getting political. It's a little bit broader than that. There's other things I want to cover, namely about the issue of diversity and identity politics in the film industry these days. I was going to say in Hollywood, but actually it extends beyond that. Well, Hollywood sort of the epicenter. So first of all, the winners this year, I'm not going to read them all out, but some of the leading categories, the most high profile categories. Best Picture, Parasite. That's South Korean sort of horror satire, I guess is how it would be described. Best Actor in a Leading Role, Joaquin Phoenix for Joker. Best Actress in a Leading Role, Renee Zellweger for Judy. Best Supporting Actor, Brad Pitt for Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. Best Supporting Actress, Laura Dern for Marriage Story. Best Director, Bong Joon-ho for Parasite. I'll just read out a few others. Best Original Score, Hildur Guðnadóttir for Joker. I guess that's an Icelandic name, not sure. Best Original Song, Elton John and Bernie Taupin for I'm Gonna Love Me Again from Rocket Man. Best Documentary Short Subject, Learning to Skateboard in a War Zone if you're a girl. Best Animated Feature Film, Toy Story 4. Achievement in Cinematography, Roger Deakins for 1917. Roger Deakins has been nominated many times. 1917 is also doing very well. I'd like to see it, but basically, yeah, um, money problems as always for me. But anyway, best adapted screenplay, Taika Waititi. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. For Jojo Rabbit. I wasn't sure about that one. It looked a bit strange to me. I'm not sure if I'd enjoy a film like that. Anyway, this event made history because it's the first time that a foreign language film has won Best Picture. So congratulations to that director, um, Bong Joon-ho for Parasite. I have quite a large number of South Korean films, and it's definitely they do stand out. They have a particular style that is quite compelling and quite original. And I think particularly the South Korean film industry, their horrors and the psychological films are standout. When we think of things like Old Boy, Tale of Two Sisters, and there's others. Um, One of the first big South Korean films, actually, we're talking about this new Korean wave, but we could go back to 2006 with The Host, which was kind of a modern day monster movie. It was like a 1950s monster movie, but in a contemporary 2000 setting as it then was. Um, so that in itself kind of flies in the face of the diversity argument because you have a South Korean Asian director winning Best Director, and his film gets Best Picture. Um, So that brings me to the issue of diversity in the film industry. There is a lot to say around the subject. I've just seen Joaquin Phoenix's speech at the BAFTAs, which isn't quite as high profile as the Oscars, but it may be. It's pretty high profile. I mean, it's up there with Cannes, and it's pretty high profile. Anyway, he made a speech, and in that very sort of sullen style that the guy has, he's a pretty serious guy. He doesn't He's not one of those actors that likes to joke and pretty serious guy. I think he takes himself very seriously. That's the perception I get. Anyway, he made a speech about diversity, and he said he was part of the problem. He hadn't fought hard enough to make sure that there was diversity on the sets that he's been on. Well, Joaquin, you're not the director. You don't get to decide that. Or producer, I guess it would be, that's involved in casting. But yeah, I found it a little bit cringy to be completely honest. It's getting a lot of support for it, but then at his Oscar speech, it was about veganism. So when I'm talking about political actors, I think it's fair to say Joaquin Phoenix is one of the most political in terms of making, statements. And again, I would say he's entitled to his opinion, but to me, that's just, I mean, put it this way: Laurence Fox is being blacklisted, Joaquin Phoenix is getting praised. That to me demonstrates a sort of groupthink that is going on in the film industry these days. One actor's virtue signaling on overdrive. You know, he's ticking all the boxes for being woke and being. And I think those are his sincere views, by the way. I don't think he's necessarily just doing it for that reason, but that is the byproduct. You know, he is ticking all the right boxes for the current ideological trend in the film industry. He gets praised. You know, he gets, well, what a great, sincere guy. Meanwhile, Laurence Fox is vilified. There are concerted efforts by equity, or within equity, I should say. They've denied it to try and get him blacklisted. I find that frankly sinister. And I do think it's a contemporary equivalent of McCarthyism or the blacklisting of Hollywood actors in the 50s and late 40s for being supposed communists. At that time, it was a hysterical right wing reaction. Now it's a hysterical left wing reaction in response to the whole diversity issue. Um, and you know they come up with so many statistics like there's this many actors nominated. This is how many who are minorities. There's this many women directors because that's been another issue, gender representation. Right, I'm not going to say the industry is perfect in terms of representation. I'm not going to say that everyone has absolute equal chances and opportunities because I'm not an insider. I cannot say I've been in the shoes of a minority actor. But having said that, and Lawrence Fox touched on this, I do find it quite galling, quite frankly, when you have a minority actor or someone in the industry who's clearly done well for themselves. Um, they've got awards or even they've been nominated. They're famous, they're rich. I have to admit, my instinct is, what are you complaining about? Clearly, the industry's been good for you. And okay, you've worked hard at it, but I think one of the problems with all of this narrative is it insinuates that white actors get it on a plate. It insinuates that they don't work hard for the roles. It insinuates that because white actors get awards, then, oh, well, they don't really deserve it. They're just getting it because they're white. Here's the thing, if it's about looking like society, the majority of both British and American society is still white. The United States, particularly California, it's going to be, for example, I think California is something like 50% Hispanic these days. Um, and then there's white Hispanic and non-white Hispanic, which brings to other issues about visible minorities versus, someone could be a minority, but they're not a visible minority. So someone who's East European will be white, but they're technically a minority. So there's a lot of dynamics around that. I mean, the late Kirk Douglas was of Russian descent. So if there are situations where what gets me is this whole thing about diversity is based on this perception that there is active discrimination. And I haven't seen any actual evidence anyone has produced that actually minority actors are being discriminated against, overlooked perhaps, and that's maybe something that needs to be addressed. But what I find really problematic is when this is being tied into something like racism. Like this person isn't being nominated because they're black or because they're Asian. I think that is a very damaging claim to make. Um, because it is insinuating that there is a racist thing going on there. And I haven't seen anyone produce any actual evidence of that. Saying that so many people are nominated is a sign of racism or not nominated is problematic when you think that actually, if you look at wider society, representation in Hollywood probably is not that different from the demographics of wider society. In other words, I mean, I don't know what the precise figures would be, but I don't think it would be that different I mean, if you have more white actors in the United States and in the United Kingdom, then just by math, by common sense, there's going to be more white nominees because there's more of them. That's, let's say, for example, you have, and this is very, very rudimentary and crude as an example, but let's say you have a particular You take 100 actors, right, from the UK, probably 70 of them will be white, 80 of them will be white, the other 20 or 30 will be visible minorities. Now let's say when the awards come about, you get a situation where 3 out of 4 of the nominees are white. Does that indicate racism? No, I would say that indicates a representation of what the demographic situation is. So I think there's dishonesty with this whole movement about what actual reality is of public demographics. What I'm saying is, if society had, for example, 50% of society was black or Asian, then I would say, yeah, there is a massive underrepresentation. I think there may be more of an argument actually for underrepresentation of women directors than there is on the minority issue. I mean, even when the whole Oscars so white thing was going on, what happened? You had a Mexican director, Alejandro Inarritu, won Best Picture, excuse me, Best Director for The Revenant. So there is a real sort of sense of it has, even when minority people are represented, that's ignored. It's just like this whole narrative of, oh, it's a white establishment and it's racist. Hollywood can be criticized for many, many things, not least the whole Me Too scandal, all the issues around that. Hollywood can be seen as elitist. It can be seen as having strong left-wing bias, and it's kind of ironic that the very institution that's being accused of being racist and not representing minorities enough is the very institution that goes into overdrive in terms of representation. And if we look at some of the top films of the last decade, the number of films that have been focused around civil rights sort of subjects, think about it: 12 Years a Slave, Selma, Harriet, um, Django Unchained, I forget the title, the one about the African American women in NASA, Green Book. There's a whole swathe of films, Moonlight, that are focused on minority issues, and some of them have done very well in terms of critical acclaim. Panther, for that matter. So the idea that minority issues are just being ignored seems frankly preposterous. What really concerns me above anything else about this, you can say I'm wrong, you can say, oh, Nathan, you're overlooking this, you're overlooking that. But what is irrefutable? And this is demonstrated by the way Laurence Fox is treated, by the fact that he is now being blacklisted, essentially. What I find irrefutable is there is a group thing at play here, whereby white actors, have to conform to a particular way of thinking. Well, actually, minority actors as well, because if they don't get on this bandwagon, then they're seen as traitors to the cause. So there is this attitude that if you don't share this, if you're a white actor, basically you have to bow your head in apology, apologize for being white. Doesn't matter if you've worked your ass off in the role. If you've had take after take after take, if you've really worked hard for it and you've earned it, you know, this this drive is going to be, well, you're white, so that's why you got it. And I think that is where we're going with this. In his speech, Joaquin Phoenix says no one is asking for things on a plate. Well, I'm not refuting that minority actors work just as hard as their white peers. That's not the issue for me. Some of them are very talented and they deserve awards. They deserve awards because they're good actors and actresses, not because, oh, they're black or Asian, therefore they need to be represented. I think it takes away from the art. It actually takes away from their individual talents. It's this group think, and it's this clumping people together as groups, as black actors and Asian actors. How about just being a good actor? Morgan Freeman deserves credit for rejecting this narrative. I've seen interviews where he said, "Look, I'm an actor. I'm not a black actor. And he's kind of went against the school of thought, and he's one of the most prominent actors around. Um, I really think it's a negative trend, and I just find it particularly galling when you have a minority actor who's doing well for themselves and they still, frankly, feel cause to whine about it and complain about it. They have lifestyles, or rather, they are getting, money and paychecks that most people will never see in a lifetime. And yes, so are their white peers, but that's the point is actors in general. I'm talking about top actors. I'm not talking about struggling actors who are white and minority. That's another thing, incidentally. There's this idea that all white actors get it on a plate. Um, One area where I disagreed with Laurence Fox was he was talking about working class actors. I actually think there is more of a challenge for white working class actors who um, I would suggest actually they probably have more barriers than a black actor in London. I think there may be regional issues there on some level. But as a general way of looking at this, I just think the focus has went with this obsession with identity politics, and that's went away from meritocracy. I'm not saying that when minority actors get nominated, they don't deserve it. But what I'm saying is the perception is going to be that they're just getting it for that reason. So ironically, that's a side effect of all of this. Um, and I just think it's sad that the whole industry is now being that, every Academy Awards ceremony, every BAFTAs, this issue gets interjected into it. It doesn't matter if minority people are nominated, are getting awards, the issue still rumbles on. Oh, lack of diversity. And I would say, what exactly are they pushing for? Are they pushing for 50-50 representation? Because if that's the case, it's not, that doesn't actually match wider society. If there are examples where talented minority actors are being overlooked, um, I feel for them on a personal level, but to suggest that equals racism, I think is damaging. So I don't have much respect for Joaquin Phoenix, doing this. It may be that's his personal conviction. I think it probably is, but I think he's wrong, and I think he said he's part of the problem. Yeah, I would agree. You're part of the problem in stoking up identity politics. When did what happened to entertainment for the sake of entertainment? I saw an interview with the late Kirk Douglas where he said people go to the cinema for escapism. But because we're now getting ideology rammed down our throats, and I'm not talking about the plots of the films, because you get intelligent, artistic films that do have a message, that's fine. But I'm talking about outside the spectrum of film. In the past, there was politics in films, but it was less interjected outside that dimension. Hollywood's always been political, I get that. I really think what we're having now is politics being forced onto the red carpet in a way like never before. Certainly a lot more so than the past. And that's really unfortunate. It's turning people off. And I don't think these actors realize it. I don't think those who are pushing this narrative realize that it's actually polarizing. It's not because people don't want to see minority actors getting awards. That is not the issue. It's because of the perception that this is now being prioritized as identity politics comes before meritocracy. And this ridiculous idea that white actors are just getting awards on a plate. I really don't think that's the case. And I think it's very damaging. Very damaging. I think identity politics in general is damaging. Now, people might say Lauren Fox is doing identity politics himself, but all he done was refuse to apologize for being a white man. That is all he done. He didn't come out with some sort of white supremacist statement. He didn't start the white is right movement or some other such nonsense. He had to go on the defensive because it was a ridiculous line of questioning. And I think that's the problem. White actors basically have a choice. You either jump on the bandwagon and virtue signal, or you do what Laurence Fox done and you get blacklisted. That's basically the situation. Or you stay quiet and don't say anything, which is also an option. But like I say on Question Time, the line of questioning that Laurence Fox had was utterly ridiculous. And this is a disconnect between regular people and the film establishment. Ironically, for all the talk about, oh, it's not representative, actually, the real disconnect is that actors seem to think the public care about this stuff. They don't. If you're working hard as an actor, I wish you well. You should be recognized for that work. But, don't make every damn thing about race. Just because you haven't got an award doesn't mean, oh, it's because you're black. That's what I find particularly galling about this. The jump to conclusion, oh, it's because I'm a minority. Maybe it's because the Academy, in the case of the Oscars or the BAFTAs, just felt that in this particular occasion, other actors merited it more. No one ever talks about white actors that are overlooked, even though that often happens. And I can give one example of this: Timothy Spalding, great actor. He is versatile. He has he ever got a Academy Award nod? As far as I know, he hasn't. So there's other examples of that. Late Bob Hoskins died 6 years ago. When he passed away, the Oscars just totally admitted that, even though he was a very established, versatile actor. If he had been black or Asian, that would have been a total like, oh, look how racist it is. So there's obvious double standards going on here. But we're now getting a situation where diversity is being interjected just for the sake of it. And I'll give an example of this. Mary Queen of Scots, a historic drama, Mary Queen of Scots, notwithstanding the inaccuracies within the film, the fact that Mary Queen of Scots never actually directly met Queen Elizabeth I, what they had in that film were senior courtiers in 16th century Britain who were black. That just wouldn't have happened. There would have been minorities in Britain, but there would have been probably Moorish traders and merchants in London. The idea that senior courtesans of either Elizabeth or Mary were visible minorities is just that is virtue signaling nonsense. They had Bess of Hardwick, excuse me. If you look at portraits of her, she was clearly white, very white at that. She had the ridiculous white face paint that Elizabeth also used. Played by Gemma Chan, British Chinese. Now, no disrespect to Gemma Chan, but that's an example of how we are now seeing actually minority actors taking white historic characters, and no one says a word about that, or at least the public do, but the industry doesn't because they are, you know. So that's what I see happening. If you have a historic film that doesn't portray minority people, Downton Abbey um, was quite revolutionary in that sense because it was all white. And inevitably there'll be cries of, oh, where's the white people? Excuse me, where's the minority people? But look at the time context. It's set in the 1920s. So the diversity then was significantly less than it is today. Um, when it comes to historic films, I do think of authenticity is important. I mean, it's quite interesting, and I'll close up with this. Joaquin Phoenix said he hasn't done enough to speak out on sets that he was on. Well, when he got the best supporting nod for his role as Commodus in Gladiator, um, they had minority people in that film, and that is realistic because the Roman Empire was diverse. So that's an example that kind of flies in the face of what he's claiming, that there hasn't been enough diversity on the sets that he's worked on. Well, that's one of the most prominent. Anyway, I just think it's polarizing, and I think that what I find really alarming about this situation is this group think. And if you dare to have a different opinion, I mean, if I was an actor, if I was a prominent actor making this video, I would probably be right now, my name would be being pulled from productions. That's the situation that we have, simply for people saying something different from the group think. Charlotte Rampling spoke out with the Oscars so white thing. She said she felt it was racism against white actors. Now, whilst that might be a little bit exaggerated, I know what she was driving at. She immediately had to make a groveling apology because she was utterly attacked. So that's what we're seeing happening. I do think, of course, if someone's working hard, they want to get recognition. But I just would question this idea that just because minority actors may not be represented in every single event at the sort of ratio that these campaigners are demanding does not mean that there is racism in the industry. I mean, if there are actors being refused a role because they're black or Asian, yeah, that's racist. With the exception of historic films where authenticity is important. But I just think that the trajectory of this, I've heard it said that people are going off the cinema now. Netflix could be replacing it. Well, I think the whole diversity thing comes into Netflix as well. But I don't think it's killing the industry exactly. I still enjoy the cinema. I still enjoy film. But I do think that the whole identity politics thing and the obsession around it is polarizing to people, and I'd like to see less of it. Not because then the computers will say, "Oh, we'll have more diversity and we won't complain so much." Yes, you will. You will always find reasons to complain because it's this professional victimhood narrative that we're seeing. I just think it's really, it's it's not a good thing. It's divisive. It's polarizing, and more to the point, it's not showing the whole picture. Because if it's about diversity, if it's about matching society, look at demographics of society. So actually, the industry, the idea that it doesn't represent wider society, that's questionable. It's very questionable. Let me know your thoughts.